Please be seated. So I've been thinking about monuments in Memphis this week. And no one actually brings these two categories together for me quite like my cousin Matt Wright. Let me explain. Matt is not actually from Memphis, he's from Seattle, but he was lead singer and chief songwriter for the punk band Gas Huffer. Any Gas Huffer fans out there tonight? No? I thought this was a music town. Anyway, Matt makes me think of Memphis because in 1991, when Gas Huffer released their first full-length album, Janitors of Tomorrow, Matt was the only cool person alive in America with Elvis Presley sideburns. It's true. If you had mutton chops in 1991, well, bless your heart. Matts were the only cool ones in existence at the time. Hipsters had not been invented yet. But lest you think my cousin's reverence for the king was fleeting, you should know that he was still sporting those sideburns in 2005 when the last Gas Huffer record, Lemonade for Vampires, was released, an album whose second track was titled, I kid you not, Monument. I know, Elvis-looking punk rocker singing about monuments way back in 2005, it gives me chills too. So for those of you who don't know the song, it begins like this. I dreamt I saw a monument erected in my name. The mayor was there to cut the ribbon, still nobody came. The pond was stocked with fishes, hand-selected one by one. Refreshments for 1,000 sat there spoiling in the sun. It's nice, right? I've got it on vinyl. Well, the song ends like this. The mayor packed up his scissors and removed his beaver hat. He figured he should go. The Veuve Clicquot had all gone flat. The keynote speaker took one look and got back into the cab, his words already etched upon that alabaster slab. So wouldn't it be sad if nobody came to the grand unveiling of a marble monument to you? Like I said, I've been thinking about monuments in Memphis this week. Mayors in beaver hats, ribbons and fishes and champagne. All the unrequited pomp in the song is very, very sad because we humans are a monument-making species, aren't we? It's this grand and ancient way we announce to the ages what we find important, memorable, noble, magnificent. But here's the curious thing. God is not into monuments. I mean, God is really not into monuments. Go way back into the beginnings of the Bible, and you'll find a misguided human impulse toward graven images, towards gods we can chisel and carve into shapes that serve our purposes, solider gods who stay put. We've been projecting sacredness onto the wrong things for the wrong reasons for a long, long time, it seems. And so in commandment number 2, God says, don't do that. No idols. Do not worship monuments. Maybe it's to be expected then that when God does show up in this story, God appears as everything monuments and idols are not. A pillar of fire, a cloud of smoke, a voice from a burning bush, a voice that says even God's name is a kind of unsayable non-name, something like, I am who I am. There was that Ark of the Covenant, a fancy and sacred object that seemed a little like a monument, until we hear that its golden lid formed something called the mercy seat. It was a chair for God, flanked by 2 cherubim, but the mercy seat was empty. The Hebrews carried around a magnificent, vacant throne, a chair where God was visibly not. The mercy seat was an anti-idol, if there ever was one. This invisible God with the unsayable name, whom no one can look upon and live, could the God of the Bible come to us in any less monumental ways, if you will? Well, yes, actually. At least that's what I'm proposing to you this Christmas Eve. I'm proposing that perhaps the only thing less like an idol than burning bushes and mercy seats is a mother. The Nativity is that moment in the Christian story when God says, "Fine, if you still want to make me into a cold and lifeless statue, I'll be birthed into this world by a woman." It's hard to make the most familiar story in the Christian Scriptures startling again. But it should still startle us, shouldn't it? It's the ultimate subversion of our idol-making tendencies. God as a helpless infant. God not as regal and gleaming, impervious to change and weather. God as vulnerable and scared, cold and hungry. On Christmas Eve, this is the image of God Christians sit with. God as a baby, craning his neck for the breast he's never seen, but somehow knows. And Mary, whose milk comes in as her body responds unconsciously to her child's need. Such is the ordinary miracle through which you and I and the Emperor Augustus and Jesus of Nazareth came into this world. Could anything be more antithetical to our monument-making obsessions than a mother and a child, bodies mutually vulnerable to each other, responsive and in relationship in the deepest places and ways? And in a world in which so much power has been wielded by men, there is something especially poignant about returning every Christmas to God in childbirth, the one realm to which all men remain strangers, no matter how much we've wanted to understand it or how violent we've tried to control it. Last week I spoke of my father-in-law. Tonight, let me tell you about Cora, Ardell's mother. Cora, you may not know, bore 14 children in her body. She and Henry also lived for a time in the poorest parts of the Arkansas Ozarks, which meant they knew plenty of people who couldn't afford hospitals or who couldn't get to one in time to give birth. So Cora also attended many other births besides those of her children. And at one of these, the woman's labor was getting pretty intense, so Cora turned to the poor, trembling husband and said, "Go boil us some water," an order which he dutifully obeyed, but only after he screwed up the nerve to ask, "You know, I've always wondered why the midwives send somebody to boil water in the movies. What's the water for?" Cora said, well, coffee, of course." It may have been a world ruled by Caesars and kings, but for all their schemes and power plays, women bear knowledge and wisdom in their bodies. Men can only look in on and wonder at. And maybe this is why we go off and build gleaming statues of ourselves as generals on horseback or heroes at war. We just can't quite stand the idea that when it comes to the real, sacred source of our lives, we are outsiders, awkward and unknowing, not the least bit in control. We can't stand the idea that we're really all that nervous guy who's been sent to the kitchen to put the kettle on. But here's the strange good news of Christmas, friends. How we conceive of God has everything to do with how we conceive of ourselves. And so if we could finally let go of our idolatrous images of God as a cold, unchanging monument to perfection, and trust that God was and is most present to us as perfect vulnerability and need in the newborn body of Jesus, everything in us could change as well. If we could believe that the good news of Christmas, maybe we could also end the silly project of presenting all those false and gleaming versions of ourselves to each other and just be real. Maybe we could finally trust that what's most sacred in this life and where God still wants to meet us is not where our lives feel noble and powerful and approaching perfection, but in the midst of our deepest vulnerabilities and needs, when we too are as present and as dependent upon one another as a child at his mother's breast, or as uncertain and insecure as the poor dad looking in on the miracle, a pot of water in his trembling hand. In other words, it's the actual you God loves and draws near to. That's the good news of Christmas. God is really not into monuments. What God is into is you, as you are. I'm pretty sure Matt did not think of monument as a gospel song, much less a Christmas carol when he wrote it. But he could have done worse. Because it would be a little bit glorious if one day all of humanity really did just give up its monument erecting ways for lack of interest. In fact, maybe by next year's Christmas dinner, you and yours will have learned to sing or scream, if you prefer the original. The wind blew long and cold between the chairs arranged in rows. The only thing upon them were the streamers and the bows. But your song will not be bleak. It will be full of hopefulness and joy in your rendition because everyone absent from the ribbon cutting was just going about the perfect messes of their ordinary lives, which are just the sorts of lives, according to a certain angel and a whole multitude of the heavenly host, that God favors, always has. Just the sort of lives Mary's child was born into this world to redeem. Merry Christmas.